The day I married the man I thought would make my life complete, my dead father came back on a screen, in front of everyone, and changed what love meant forever. It was a bright Saturday morning in late May of the year 2024. The sky was painfully blue, the kind that makes you forget storms exist. Our backyard had been transformed into a dream-white tents, gold-trimmed chairs, and roses so perfect they looked artificial. Yet among all the color and noise, one chair stood apart, empty, draped in a faded military jacket. My father's jacket. I told everyone it was just a tribute, a small way to honor him. The truth was, it was the only thing that made me feel less like a liar in a day built on pretending everything was fine. Richard, my stepfather, moved through the morning like a conductor directing an orchestra. His voice carried through every corner of the garden. He had paid for the band, the catering, the champagne tower, every detail down to the lace on my mother's dress. My mother called him a blessing from heaven. Sometimes I wondered if heaven accepted wire transfers. He came into our lives 5 years after the explosion that took my father in Afghanistan. Richard was kind, reliable, and always composed. But love, I was learning, can sometimes be too polished to feel real. As the makeup artist brushed my cheeks, a sudden gust of air drifted through the window carrying a scent I knew too well, motor oil mixed with cedar soap. My heart stuttered. That smell belonged to my father, embedded in the wood of his old toolbox that still sat in my garage. For a moment, it felt like he was right behind me. My best friend asked softly if I was all right. I smiled at her reflection in the mirror and lied. Perfect. Deep down, I knew perfection never lasts long. The ceremony unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. The vows were spoken, the doves released. The crowd applauded at every cue. When I looked at the empty chair, a light breeze lifted the sleeve of the jacket as if an invisible hand was waving. I blinked back tears. Across the aisle, Richard watched the same chair, his expression unreadable. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Dinner was loud and elegant, filled with stories, laughter, and too many glasses of wine. Then came the moment for speeches. Richard rose from his seat, a folded note in one hand, a glass of wine in the other. "This," he began, "is for the man who cannot be here tonight." The guests clapped politely. He cleared his throat and started reading. His voice was smooth, rehearsed until the microphone began to crackle. A sudden burst of static filled the speakers, and the screen behind him flickered to life. Everyone assumed it was part of the slideshow. But then a grainy image appeared. A man in uniform. Dust. Wind. And then a voice, deep, familiar, trembling. "Sweetheart," he said, "if you're watching this, it means I didn't make it home." The fork slipped from my hand. The entire room froze. It was my father. His face older, rougher, but still unmistakably him. He smiled, though his eyes carried exhaustion. "I just wanted you to know," he continued, "that no matter what happens, you are stronger than anything life throws at you. Walk proud, love deep, and never forget real love never dies." Then the screen went black. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was thick enough to hear my own pulse. My mother's face drained of color. Richard stood motionless, the paper still in his hand, as if his entire authority had been stripped away in one breath. He didn't know about the video. I could see that instantly. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost reclaim what he thought was his. Guests whispered, confused and uneasy. My mother grabbed his arm and led him away. I stayed behind, numb, my wedding dress heavy as if soaked in rain. I stepped out into the garden where the fairy lights glowed softly in the night. The air smelled of roses and electricity, that faint metallic scent after a storm. I tried to steady my breathing, but my thoughts were louder than the music. That video, it had to come from somewhere. Someone had it. Someone played it. But who? A memory struck me like a blade. 1 week earlier, I had found an unopened envelope in a wooden box among my father's medals. It was sealed, written in his uneven handwriting. "For my little girl, on the day she finds her forever." I had slipped it into my drawer and promised myself I would open it after the honeymoon. I never imagined that the letter might be connected to something much larger. By the time I returned to the reception, half the guests were gone. The music had stopped, and only a few candles burned low. I walked to the empty chair. The jacket had fallen onto the grass. I picked it up and pressed it against my chest. It smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I miss you, Dad." Somewhere inside, a quiet realization surfaced. Maybe love doesn't end when life does. Maybe it only waits for the right moment to remind us. As I turned to leave, one of the staff approached, holding something small. "Ma'am," he said gently. This was left on the stage. He handed me a flash drive tied with an old ribbon. On its surface, in faded ink, were the words, "For my little girl, from Dad." My hands shook as I held it. The fairy lights flickered, once, twice, then went dark. And that was when I knew my wedding wasn't the beginning of a new life, it was the continuation of a love that refused to die. That night, I could not sleep. The sound of the wedding still echoed through the house laughter that had already soured, music that now felt like mockery. My dress hung over the chair by the window, wilted and heavy with the scent of roses. The flash drive sat on my nightstand, small and harmless looking, yet it pulled at me like gravity. It was the first thing my father had ever given me that I was afraid to touch. By sunrise, I gave in. I slipped the drive into my laptop, the hum of the machine breaking the silence. The screen flickered, then opened to a single folder titled, "For Her." Inside were 3 files, 1 video, 2 letters in scanned handwriting. My hands trembled as I clicked on the video. The image was dim, the sound distant, but his voice was unmistakable. "If you are seeing this," my father began, "then I did not make it home from our last mission." His tone was calm, the kind of calm that only comes when a man already knows his fate. He smiled faintly. "I need you to know that I am not angry at the world for what it took from me. I just hope you never stop believing in what is right, even when the world tells you to forget." He paused. "Take care of your mother. She will need more love than she can ask for." Then his expression changed. He looked directly at the camera, eyes darker now. "And if there comes a day when someone tries to erase me from your life, do not let them. Promise me, sweetheart, do not let them." The screen went black. I stared at my reflection on the dark glass, my pulse racing. Someone had tried to erase him. I just did not know who. The 2 scanned letters were different, one addressed to me, the other to my mother. I opened hers first. The writing was slow and uneven. He had written it from the field. "If you ever find someone new," he wrote, "love him freely, but do not let him rewrite our story." My stomach turned. It was as if he had seen Richard coming long before any of us did. When I confronted my mother later that morning, she was sitting at the kitchen counter, still in her robe, staring at her untouched coffee. The sunlight caught the gold band on her finger, Richard's ring, not my father's. I placed the flash drive beside her cup. "You knew about this?" I asked quietly. She did not answer right away. "I could not bear to watch it," she said finally. "Every time I saw his handwriting, it felt like losing him again." Her voice cracked. "When Richard came, he helped me breathe again. I thought if I kept your father's memory quiet, we could finally live." I stared at her, feeling something colder than anger, disappointment that felt ancient. "You did not just keep him quiet," I said. "You buried him twice." That sentence hung in the air between us. She started to cry. For the first time in years, I did not move to comfort her. Maybe forgiveness needs silence before it can take shape. Later that afternoon, I visited the storage unit where my father's things had been kept since we moved out of the old house. The key was still on my keychain, though I had not used it in years. When the metal door rolled up, the smell of dust and old paper filled my nose. His duffel bags, boxes, and uniforms sat untouched, like artifacts from a forgotten time. I knelt down and opened one of the boxes. Inside were letters, photos, a folded flag, and a small leather journal. The pages were brittle, but his handwriting was alive. He wrote about fear, about missing us, about how war made ordinary men dream of simple mornings. He wrote about me learning to ride a bike, about Mom's lasagna, about coming home. The last entry was dated 3 days before his death. "The mission feels wrong," he wrote. "Orders have changed. If anything happens, tell her I did what I thought was right." There was no detail about where or why, only that final line scrawled and fading, "Do not let the story die with me." When I left the storage unit, the air outside felt heavier. I sat in my car for a long time, holding that journal. For the first time, I realized that grief was not the hardest part of losing someone. It was the silence that follows when everyone else decides to move on. Richard came home late that evening. I could tell he'd been drinking. His tie was loose, his smile too polite. "You looked beautiful yesterday," he said, setting down his briefcase. "A perfect wedding despite the interruption." The word interruption hit me like ice. "That interruption was my father," I said. He sighed, long and tired. "Yes, and it was inappropriate. Someone clearly tampered with the setup. It ruined the moment." His tone was calm, managerial. "We can talk about it when you are ready." But I was ready now. "Did you know about the video?" I asked. His eyes narrowed slightly, a small flicker that told me everything. "No," he said too quickly. "Of course not." I stepped closer. "Then how did it play from your laptop, Richard?" He froze. For a moment, I saw something behind his expression. Fear, maybe, or guilt disguised as irritation. "It does not matter," he muttered, walking past me. "Let the dead rest." But my father's voice kept repeating in my head, "Do not let them erase me." That night, after Richard went to bed, I sat in the dark living room, holding the flash drive again. The fairy lights from the wedding still hung outside, flickering in the wind. I thought about how easily we replace grief with comfort, truth with convenience. The drive felt warm in my hand, almost alive. I whispered, "I will not let you fade, Dad." Then, out of the quiet, my laptop screen blinked on by itself. The folder reopened. A new file appeared, one that was not there before. Its title read, "Mission footage, do not show publicly." And as the first frame loaded, I realized my father's story was not over. It was only beginning. The video began with static, then a sudden blur of movement dust, shouting, the metallic hum of rotors cutting through dry air. A timestamp flickered across the corner, March 25th, 2019. The same month my father was declared killed in action, my breath caught. The screen cleared, and I saw him alive, tense and alert, leading a small squad through a desolate stretch of desert. His voice came through faintly. "Stay low. Communications are compromised." He looked different here. Not the calm, smiling man from the farewell video. His eyes darted constantly. Behind him, another soldier carried a small black case marked with military insignia I did not recognize. The camera turned suddenly as an explosion rippled in the distance. My father shouted an order, then the screen shook, and the image fractured into noise. But before it froze, I caught something he wasn't wearing, his regular unit patch. It had been replaced with a blank emblem. The file ended abruptly, leaving me staring at a frozen frame of sand and shadow. My pulse hammered in my ears. I replayed it twice, then 3 times, searching for meaning. The metadata confirmed the impossible. It had been uploaded the same day the military reported him dead. But there was no death in that video. Only secrecy. Only fear. Morning light crept into the living room. Richard's footsteps approached behind me. "What are you watching?" he asked, his voice low. I turned the screen toward him. "You tell me." His face changed the kind of expression people wear when their lies catch up before they can prepare another. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. "It was on the drive. The same drive you said you knew nothing about." I watched the muscles in his jaw tighten. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said finally. "It's classified." I stood, my voice trembling but firm. "Classified? He was my father." Richard rubbed his temples as if exhausted. "You don't understand what you're getting into. That footage should have been destroyed." "By who?" I asked. He didn't answer. "Richard," I pressed, "were you part of this?" He met my eyes with a look I'd never seen from him before. Not love, not anger, but fear. "Please," he said quietly, "let this go." Then he walked out of the room. I sat back down, hands shaking. How could a man who had claimed to rebuild our lives speak like someone guarding a secret? I opened the letter addressed to me that I hadn't read yet. The first line stopped my breath. "If you ever see the truth about my last mission, you must decide what kind of daughter you want to be, the one who protects the story, or the one who finishes it." I drove to the local veterans office that afternoon, the letter folded in my coat pocket. A man named Sergeant Miller, my father's old friend, still worked there. He was older now, with silver hair and eyes that didn't blink enough. When I mentioned my father's name, his face went pale. "I haven't heard that name in a long time," he muttered. "They told us not to talk about it." I showed him the footage. He watched for less than 30 seconds before closing the laptop. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "From him," I said. He shook his head. "That operation wasn't what the reports said. It wasn't a rescue, it was containment. Something went wrong, and your father knew too much." My stomach tightened. Too much about what? He looked at me as if deciding whether to tell me or not. About who gave the order. When I pressed him, he wouldn't say more. But before I left, he slipped a small folded note into my hand. "If you really want answers," he said, "go to the storage hangar near Arlington. Unit 47. You didn't get this from me." That night, I couldn't focus on anything else. The world I thought I knew, my father's heroism, his death, even Richard's kindness, was unraveling into something darker. I drove toward Arlington after sunset, headlights slicing through rain. The hangar was hidden behind an abandoned airstrip, half-collapsed fences and flickering lights. The lock was rusted, but the code 047 opened it easily. Inside was silence and the faint smell of gasoline. Dust floated through beams of pale light. Rows of crates lined the walls, some marked with faded numbers, others unmarked completely. I walked deeper until I saw a single crate labeled with my father's name. My throat tightened. I reached out, pried the lid open, and stared inside. It wasn't filled with uniforms or medals. It was filled with documents, official reports, photos, and letters sealed with government insignia. On top of the pile sat a single envelope. My name, written in his handwriting. I picked it up carefully, afraid even my touch might erase it. Inside, a short note. If you're reading this, it means they didn't want the truth out. The man who calls himself your stepfather knows more than he ever told you. Trust no one until you see the second tape. I froze. Second tape? There was more? I searched through the crate, my hands trembling. Beneath the folders, wrapped in a sheet of plastic, was another flash drive. This one labeled in bold letters. Evidence. Internal only. My father's final words from the previous video echoed in my mind, do not let them erase me. I pocketed the drive and turned toward the exit, the cold air biting my skin. But just as I stepped outside, I noticed a car parked in the distance. Headlights off, engine running, watching. And that was when I realized I was not the only one looking for the truth. The car in the distance didn't move. Its headlights were off, its silhouette barely visible under the broken floodlights of the airstrip. I stood frozen at the hangar door, the cold air cutting into my skin. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but curiosity had a stronger grip than fear. I slipped the flash drive into my coat pocket, locked the hangar behind me, and walked calmly to my car. The moment I started the engine, the other vehicle's lights flicked on. They followed me for 7 miles before disappearing into the night. Back home, I sat in the dark. My father's crate opened beside me. The second flash drive rested on the table like a loaded weapon. For hours, I just stared at it. Richard's footsteps upstairs creaked across the floor, then silence. I waited until the house was completely still before inserting the drive into my laptop. It took a moment to load. One single file appeared, no title, no date. Only a string of random letters. I clicked it. The video opened to a briefing room. Fluorescent lights, grainy footage, 6 soldiers sitting at a metal table, my father among them. Across from them stood a man in civilian clothes, face partially hidden by the shadow of a projector. The man was speaking. You are to retrieve the device before it crosses the border. No documentation, no communication, no survivors if compromised. My father shifted uneasily. Sir, our orders are humanitarian. This isn't protocol. The man stepped closer to the camera, revealing his face, and my blood went cold. It was Richard. The room erupted in background noise, chairs scraping, voices rising. My father's voice cut through the chaos. I won't be part of this. The recording jumped, distorted, then ended abruptly with the sound of a door slamming. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. My stepfather, my supposed savior, had been part of my father's final mission, and he had lied about everything. The next morning, Richard acted as if nothing had changed. He poured coffee, asked about my sleep, and kissed my mother's forehead like a man rehearsing a role. I studied him quietly, every gesture, every pause. The same hands that rebuilt our house had also signed the order that sent my father to his death. You're quiet today, he said, glancing at me over his mug. Just tired, I replied. A lot on my mind. He smiled faintly. You'll learn to let the past rest. I almost laughed. The past wasn't resting, it was waking up. I drove to see Sergeant Miller again, but when I arrived at the veterans office, his desk was empty. A clerk told me he had requested sudden leave that morning. No notice, no destination. I left my number, but a sinking feeling told me he wasn't coming back. When I returned to my car, there was a small white envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. Inside was a single sheet of paper. They know you have the second tape. Get rid of it before he does. That night, I locked my bedroom door and watched the video again, frame by frame. My father's defiance, Richard's command, it all played like a confession from beyond the grave. I noticed something I had missed before. A whiteboard in the corner of the room with an address partially visible, Langley Facility 19B. The letters were faint, but clear enough. That was not a combat zone. It was an intelligence hub. Whatever my father's team had been ordered to retrieve, it wasn't a weapon. It was information. I needed proof before confronting Richard. My father's journal might hold it. I flipped through the pages again, reading every line until I found one that stopped me cold. R said this mission will make us ghosts before we ever die. The initial. R. Richard. There was no longer doubt. He hadn't just replaced my father, he had orchestrated the silence that followed him. My mother was in the garden when I found her. She was trimming the roses, her hands trembling slightly. "Mom," I said softly, "how well did you really know Richard?" She looked up, startled. "What kind of question is that?" "The kind you ask when you find out your father's death wasn't an accident." Her pruning shears fell into the soil. "Stop," she whispered. "Please, don't do this." I took a step closer. "He was in the video, Mom. I saw him give the order." She covered her mouth, eyes wide with denial. "No, he saved us. He saved himself," I interrupted. That evening, when Richard returned, the house felt like a trap. He called my name once, then twice, walking down the hall. I sat in the living room with the laptop open on the coffee table. The video paused at the moment his face appeared. He stopped in the doorway. For the first time, I saw the truth reflected in his eyes, recognition, guilt, and the faintest shadow of fear. "Where did you get that?" he asked. I didn't answer. He took a slow breath. "You shouldn't have gone digging. I just wanted to know who killed my father," I said. He sighed. "And now you do. What will you do with it?" I felt my throat tighten. "Tell my mother the truth." His expression hardened. "That would destroy her. So would living a lie." He stepped forward, lowering his voice. "You don't understand what you're stepping into. There are things you can't undo once they're seen." I stood up, the laptop between us like a line drawn in sand. "Then you shouldn't have left it behind." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The tension was so thick it felt physical. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Your father wasn't supposed to die." His words cracked like glass. "He tried to stop the mission. They sent me to bring him back, but he ran. When the explosion happened, I thought it was over. I thought keeping the truth buried was mercy." I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. "Mercy?" I repeated. "You married his widow." His eyes dropped to the floor. "I tried to fix what I broke." The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, my mother's. She had heard everything. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. Richard turned, reaching for her, but she stepped back. "Is it true?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Her silence was worse than any scream. The moments stretched endlessly. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the house. The door slammed, and the echo lingered in the still air. I looked back at Richard. He stood motionless, his world collapsing around him. "It's over," I said quietly, but he shook his head. "Not yet. There are people who will come for that tape." Outside, the wind rose suddenly, rattling the windows. And in the faint reflection of the glass, I saw headlights approaching the driveway, 2 cars, no plates, moving slow. The headlights stopped at the end of our driveway. 2 black cars, engines still running, their lights cutting sharp lines through the rain. I stood frozen by the window, watching men step out in dark coats. Richard moved first. He grabbed his coat, his voice low but urgent. "Give me the drive." I didn't move. "Who are they?" I asked. He didn't answer. "If they find it," he said, "they won't just erase the evidence, they'll erase you too." His eyes were desperate now, stripped of the calm authority he always wore like armor. Outside, the men spread out, one heading toward the back door. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my throat. Richard grabbed my arm. "Please, listen to me. I can get them to leave if you hand it over." For a moment, I almost believed him. But then I remembered my father's words. "Do not let them erase me." I pulled away. "You lied once to save yourself. I won't let you do it again." His expression hardened. "You don't know what you're doing." The first knock came 3 heavy thuds against the front door. My mother's car was still gone. It was just me and him. "Open up," a voice commanded from outside. Richard straightened, his tone shifting to something I hadn't heard before, military calm. "Stay quiet," he whispered, then louder. "Who is it?" No answer. Another knock, this one harder. He looked at me. "Go upstairs. Now." I hesitated, then backed away slowly, clutching the flash drive in my palm. From the landing, I watched him open the door. 2 men stepped inside. They wore plain clothes, but moved with the precision of soldiers. "Mr. Hayes," one said. Hayes, Richard's real surname. "We need to recover an item you've been safeguarding." Richard's voice was steady. "You're too late." The man's tone sharpened. "Then we'll take whatever's left." The sound of shuffling feet and muffled voices followed. Then, a crash. I ran to my father's office upstairs, locked the door, and plugged the drive into the laptop. I didn't have time to think. I copied every file onto a hidden cloud folder my father once used for family videos, labeled harmlessly as Christmas memories. The progress bar crawled painfully slow. Downstairs, a shout echoed, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. I unplugged the drive, shoved it into my jacket, and climbed out through the window onto the roof. Rain soaked my dress as I crawled toward the gutter, my hands trembling. Below, I saw two men dragging Richard toward the car. One of them looked up. Our eyes met. He shouted, pointing. "She's here!" I jumped. The impact knocked the air from my lungs, but adrenaline carried me forward. I ran barefoot across the yard, through the mud, into the dark. Behind me, engines roared. Headlights flashed across the trees as I reached the fence and climbed. My fingers slipped, tearing against the metal, but I made it over. I ran until the lights faded behind me, until the only sound left was my heartbeat and the whisper of rain. When I finally stopped, I was on the edge of town, near the old railway bridge. I hid beneath it, trying to catch my breath. The flash drive was still in my pocket, warm against my skin. For a moment, I thought about my father, about how he must have felt the same kind of fear before his final mission. Except he never made it home. I had to. At dawn, I went to a motel on the outskirts of the city and used the front desk computer to check the cloud link. The files were there, all intact. But there was something new. A fourth file had appeared overnight, automatically uploaded. The title read, "If They Find You." I hesitated, then played it. My father appeared on screen again, sitting in a small tent, eyes tired but resolute. "If you're watching this," he said softly, "it means they've tried to silence the truth. You need to know the names. Look for Project Northwind. It's not about weapons, it's about what they were using soldiers to test. People like me were never meant to survive it." He paused. "And if someone you trust tells you to run, don't. They'll never stop chasing ghosts, but they're afraid of light. Bring it into the open." The video ended with coordinates. I wrote them down on a napkin. Fort Reagan, Section 9. My hands shook. That was a restricted military research zone, 2 states away. I realized what my father wanted, to finish what he started. Before leaving the motel, I turned on the television in the lobby. The morning news played. My stomach tightened when I saw Richard's face. The reporter's voice said, "Former defense contractor Richard Hayes found dead in an apparent home invasion. Authorities suspect robbery." The words faded into static. I stood there motionless. For all his lies, part of me still felt the ache of loss. He had been both my betrayer and my protector. I turned off the screen and whispered to myself, "You tried to fix what you broke, now it's my turn." That night, I packed a small bag, tucked the flash drive into an inner pocket, and started the long drive toward Fort Reagan. The coordinates repeated in my head like a heartbeat. I didn't know what waited there or who, but I knew one thing. My father's story wasn't just about war. It was about truth buried under men's ambition. And as the highway lights disappeared behind me, a single thought echoed in the dark. If I found what he died for, someone else would die trying to stop me. The road to Fort Reagan stretched endlessly through open plains and half-forgotten towns. The sky above was gray and heavy, like it knew what waited at the end. I drove without music, without rest, surviving on gas station, coffee, and silence. Every few miles, I checked the rearview mirror. Sometimes I thought I saw headlights following, but they always vanished by the next curve. Fear had become part of the landscape, quiet, constant, impossible to shake. 2 days later, just after sunset, I reached the edge of a restricted perimeter marked by rusted fences and faded warning signs. "Government property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." The words looked old, but the cameras mounted above them were new. I parked my car half a mile away, concealed beneath a cluster of trees. The coordinates from my father's message pointed to a decommissioned testing complex deep inside the compound. I packed my flashlight, his journal, and the flash drive, then crossed into the field on foot. The wind howled through the open plain, carrying the faint smell of burned metal. Every step brought back flashes of my father's voice. "Walk proud, love deep, never forget." The closer I got to the main gate, the more I felt that this place wasn't abandoned at all. A low hum vibrated through the ground. Somewhere beyond the fences, power still flowed. I found a break in the wire near an old drainage tunnel. Crawling through, I emerged behind a warehouse-sized structure with blacked-out windows. The air inside smelled of dust and ozone. My flashlight beam swept across old desks, file cabinets, and machinery sealed under plastic. Everything looked frozen in time until I saw a single computer monitor still glowing faintly in the dark. Its screen displayed a blinking prompt. "Authorization required." I connected the flash drive. The screen flickered, then unlocked. Files began decrypting one by one, revealing folders named after dates and locations: Kandahar, Mosul, Luga. Each contained data logs marked Human Test Batch. My stomach turned. My father's unit hadn't been retrieving a weapon, they'd been retrieving proof that one existed. Project Northwind was an experimental program using soldiers to test chemical exposure in battlefield environments. My father's mission wasn't to secure the device, it was to destroy the evidence. He must have discovered that the operation was internal funded and protected by the same agency that sent him. A metallic noise echoed behind me. I froze, turned off the light, and held my breath. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving closer. I ducked behind a desk, watching shadows shift across the wall. 2 figures entered, flashlights sweeping the room. One of them spoke quietly into a radio. No sign yet, but the system's active. Someone accessed the archive. My heart pounded so loud I was sure they could hear it. When their beams turned away, I slipped toward a side door and crept down a stairwell into a lower level. The air grew colder, the walls damp. Down here, I found rows of locked cabinets labeled biometrics, exposure studies, mortality reports. Every label felt heavier than the last. I opened one drawer and froze inside were photographs of soldiers, each marked deceased. The last photo stopped me. My father. Except the date of death wasn't the day the military gave us. It was 2 weeks later. My hand shook as I lifted the photo. Behind it was another image, him alive, sitting in a sterile room, eyes hollow. A tag read, Subject 12 amperes, terminated after non-compliance. My vision blurred. He hadn't died in battle. They had killed him after he refused to stay silent. The sound of boots echoed again from above. I grabbed the file and backed toward the stairs. The flashlight beams appeared at the end of the hallway. I turned and ran. Alarms blared as motion sensors tripped. A red light flashed through the corridor. Voices shouted, "Stop! Put your hands up!" I ducked into another room, slammed the door, and locked it from the inside. My lungs burned. I searched for another way out. A vent, a hatch, anything. In the corner, behind a stack of crates, I saw a maintenance ladder leading to an upper vent shaft. I climbed, every muscle screaming. As I crawled through the narrow tunnel, I heard gunmetal echo behind me. One of them was following. I moved faster, scraping my knees on the steel. The tunnel opened into another storage bay. I dropped down hard, hitting the floor just as a shot rang out, tearing through the vent above me. Sparks rained down. I sprinted toward the exit door, burst into the open air, and ran until my legs gave out. When I finally stopped, the facility loomed in the distance, its sirens still wailing. I collapsed behind a mound of gravel, gasping for breath. In my pocket, the flash drive was still intact. So was the file I had taken. My father's picture. The proof of what they had done. I stayed hidden until dawn, watching military trucks swarm the area. They sealed the gates, loaded crates onto flatbeds, and drove off without sirens or markings. They were cleaning house again, but they couldn't clean what was already in the cloud. The truth was backed up now. Copied, protected. I made my way to a nearby diner off the highway, my clothes torn and streaked with dirt. The waitress gave me a strange look but said nothing. I sat in a corner booth and ordered black coffee. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I replayed everything in my mind. Richard's guilt, my mother's silence, my father's courage. Somewhere between them all was the truth he died for. That some wars don't end when soldiers fall. They end when the lies do. The television above the counter played the morning news. A headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Government announces closure of Fort Reagan following security breach. My coffee went cold. They were already spinning the story. No mention of experiments. No mention of lives lost. Just another unauthorized entry. I reached into my bag and opened my father's journal again. Between the last 2 pages, I noticed something I hadn't before, a slip of paper folded tight. Inside was a single line written in his hand. If you reach Fort Reagan, find Major Ellis. He knows everything. The name was unfamiliar, but the message was clear. There was still one person alive who could prove what happened. One man who had survived the mission and vanished afterward. I finished my coffee, left a few bills on the counter, and walked out into the morning light. The wind smelled of dust and rain. Somewhere far ahead, truth waited, fragile and dangerous. And as I started the engine and looked once more at my father's photograph, I whispered, "I'm not done, Dad. Not until they know what they did to you." Then I pulled onto the highway, unaware that another car had already begun following me from the parking lot. The man's name, Major Ellis, haunted me through every mile of road. I searched it online, in veterans forums, in archives of military personnel, but every record ended in the same word: deceased. Yet my father's handwriting had never lied. He believed Ellis was still alive. That meant someone wanted the world to think otherwise. I reached Virginia by late afternoon. The coordinates scribbled in my father's note led me not to a base, but to a forgotten coastal town called Brenton's Ferry, quiet, gray, and half-deserted. Fishing boats rocked in the harbor, their masts swaying like slow pendulums. It was the kind of place where strangers are noticed. I checked into the only motel on Main Street under a false name and paid cash. The clerk, an older man with nicotine fingers, glanced at me and said, "You here for the ghost stories or the storms?" I smiled faintly. Maybe both. The rain began again that night, steady and cold. I spread my father's journal and files across the bed, tracing the chain of events. The name Ellis appeared several times in my father's notes, sometimes with admiration, sometimes fear. One line stood out. Ellis warned me not to trust anyone who came offering protection. That could have meant Richard or anyone like him. The next morning, I visited the local library, one of those old buildings that still smelled like paper and dust. The librarian was kind, curious, but polite. I asked if she knew of anyone named Ellis, maybe an ex-soldier. She frowned, then nodded slowly. "There's a man who lives out near the marshes. Doesn't talk much. Folks say he used to be something in the army." She wrote down directions on a napkin. "But if you go out there, go before dark. Tide cuts off the road after sundown." I thanked her and drove east along a narrow road lined with bare trees. The air smelled of salt and pine. After 15 minutes, I saw a small cabin near the water, half collapsed but still standing. Smoke curled faintly from a chimney. I parked, stepped out, and felt the crunch of gravel beneath my boots. Every instinct told me I was walking into the past. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Finally, a voice rasped from inside. "Go away." I hesitated, then said, "Major Ellis, my name is—" "I know who you are," he interrupted. The door creaked open just enough for me to see a man in his 60s, gaunt, with eyes sharp as broken glass. He studied me for a long moment, then motioned me inside. The cabin was dim, lit by a single lamp and the glow of a wood stove. Maps, photographs, and old radio parts cluttered the walls. "You look like him," he said quietly. "Your father." I swallowed hard. "You knew him? Knew him?" He gave a bitter laugh. "He saved my life." He poured coffee into a chipped mug and handed it to me. "You shouldn't have come here." "I have proof," I said, showing him the folder from Fort Reagan. His expression darkened. "You really don't understand what you're holding, do you?" He sat heavily in a chair, rubbing his temples. Project Northwind wasn't supposed to exist. They tested neurological agents on soldiers to see if exposure could increase cognitive response under stress. Your father found out they were covering up deaths, our own men. I felt sick. He tried to stop it. Ellis nodded. He went rogue, sent files to a reporter in D.C., but before it could go public, the agency erased everything. Him, me, all of it. They told the world we were dead. He met my eyes. "You're stirring up ghosts that powerful people spent years burying." I pulled the flash drive from my pocket. "Then help me finish what he started." He looked at it as if it were a live grenade. "You think exposing them will bring him justice? It'll just paint a target on your back." I leaned forward. "They already know I have it. They killed Richard. They tried to kill me." His eyes softened. "Then it's too late to turn back." He stood and opened a metal box on a shelf, revealing old ID cards and photographs him and my father, smiling in desert light. "Before he died, your dad made me promise that if anyone from his family came looking, I'd give them this." From the box, he pulled a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. He handed it to me. He wrote it the night before the last mission. My fingers shook as I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was rushed but unmistakable. "Ellis, if she ever comes for answers, tell her I didn't die for the mission, I died for the truth. Northwind reaches higher than command. If they erase me, tell her to find the one called Lark." "Who's Lark?" I asked. Ellis exhaled. "Codename. A whistleblower inside the agency. Your father never knew their real identity." He hesitated. "If Lark's still alive, they're the only one who can confirm everything." Before I could respond, a noise outside cut through the rain, the crunch of gravel, footsteps approaching. Ellis's eyes widened. "You were followed." He grabbed a rifle from behind the door. "Back room now." I ducked into the narrow hallway as headlights swept across the windows. The front door burst open. A voice shouted, "Federal agents, drop your weapon!" Ellis yelled back, "You're not federal!" Gunfire erupted short, sharp bursts that echoed through the cabin. I crouched behind a wall, heart racing, the flash drive clutched tight. Wood splintered, glass shattered. I heard Ellis return fire, then a heavy thud. Silence. I crawled toward the front room. Smoke hung in the air. The lamp had fallen, flames licking across the rug. Ellis was on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. He looked up at me, eyes already fading. "Run," he whispered. "Find Lark." I pressed my hand to his chest. "Where?" His lips moved once more, barely audible. "Ravenfield." I grabbed the envelope, shoved it into my jacket, and bolted through the back door as the fire spread. Rain hammered down, hissing against the flames. Behind me, the cabin burned brighter than the sky. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Somewhere inside that inferno, another piece of my father's past was turning to ash, but his voice still echoed in my mind, steady, unbroken. Real love never dies, and as I drove into the darkness, the name repeated in my head like a drumbeat lark. The final witness. The last thread. Ravenfield wasn't on any map. It was one of those places that existed only between towns where asphalt turns to gravel, and time forgets the people who still live there. I drove for 6 hours before sunrise, guided only by Ellis's dying word, and the coordinates hidden inside the letter he had given me. The rain had stopped, but fog clung to the hills like smoke. Every few miles, the radio cut to static, as if the air itself refused to carry sound. By the time I reached the edge of Ravenfield, my car was running on fumes. The town was little more than a cluster of decaying houses, an abandoned gas station, and a diner that looked like it hadn't closed since the 1,960 seconds. I parked beside a rusted pickup and stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled weakly. A woman behind the counter glanced up. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please," I said, my voice rough. She poured a cup, studied me for a moment, then said, "You look like you've been running from something." I forced a smile. "You have no idea." The place was empty, except for an old man in the corner booth reading a newspaper. When he turned the page, I caught the reflection of a small pin on his jacket, an eagle clutching a shield. "Military issue." I hesitated, then approached him. "Excuse me, sir. I'm looking for someone named Lark." He didn't look up. "Never heard of him." His tone was too quick, too careful. I slid a photograph of my father across the table. "He told me to find Lark." That made him freeze. Slowly, he folded the newspaper and looked at me. His eyes were pale blue, sharp, assessing. "You're his daughter." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he motioned for me to sit. "The walls have ears," he said quietly. "Talk low." I leaned closer. "Are you Lark?" He hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Used to be." His voice carried the weight of years spent hiding. "Your father found out what we were doing before anyone else had the courage to. Northwind wasn't just about chemicals, it was about control. They were mapping how fear rewires loyalty." I frowned. "Control?" He nodded. "Behavioral conditioning. They wanted soldiers who obeyed without question. Chemicals were just the beginning. Your father was one of the few who resisted. That's why he had to disappear. I felt sick. He died because he said no. He died because he said too much," Lark replied, "and because I didn't get to him in time." He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn cassette tape sealed in a plastic bag. "This is the original Northwind confession, recorded by your father in Kandahar the night before the extraction went wrong. If you release it, the truth comes out, but so does every name tied to it." He paused. "Including mine." I took the tape carefully. "Why me?" He gave a sad smile. "Because you're not part of the system. You're what they never planned for a witness born from their silence." Before I could respond, the bell above the diner door rang again. A man in a gray suit walked in, his eyes scanning the room too slowly to be casual. Lark's body stiffened. "Don't look at him," he whispered. "We've been found." He slipped a folded note into my hand. "Take the tape to this address. It's a safe channel. Don't trust phones. Don't stop for anyone." He stood abruptly, tossing bills onto the table. "You were never here." Then he walked toward the exit. The man in the suit followed. I waited 5 long minutes before leaving. Outside, the fog had thickened into a white wall. I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Somewhere in the mist, a single gunshot cracked the air. Then silence. My stomach dropped. I ran toward the sound, slipping on wet gravel. The diner's neon light glowed faintly behind me. Ahead, the fog parted just enough for me to see 2 shapes on the ground. One was moving. One wasn't. I froze when I saw the pin glinting beside the body. It was Lark. The man in the suit was gone. I knelt beside him, shaking. He was still breathing, barely. Blood stained his collar. "Listen," he rasped. "In my pocket." I reached in and pulled out a small key attached to a tag that read, Locker 19, Union Station. His eyes met mine, fierce even through the pain. The rest is there. Then he went still. For a moment the world shrank to nothing but the sound of my heartbeat. I pressed my hand to his shoulder. I'll finish it, I whispered. Then I stood, wiped the blood from my hands, and turned back toward my car. The fog swallowed the road behind me like a curtain closing on a stage. By dusk, I reached the highway. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. Somewhere behind me lay a dead man who had carried my father's secret for years. Somewhere ahead lay the truth he died to pass on. The cassette felt heavy in my pocket, the key even heavier. Union Station was 300 miles away. As night fell, I switched on the radio just to fill the silence. Static. Then, faintly, a voice calm, distorted, almost mechanical cut through. You shouldn't have taken it. My blood ran cold. The voice repeated, softer this time. You can't hide forever. Then the signal died. I drove faster, the road a blur beneath the headlights. Maybe it was interference, maybe paranoia, or maybe someone was already in the frequency, listening. Either way, there was no turning back now. My father's story was no longer just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been silenced for telling the truth. And as the fog thinned and the stars reappeared overhead, I whispered into the night, Then come find me. Union Station was busier than I expected for a Sunday morning. The grand hall glowed with cold marble light, polished floors reflecting hurried travelers, and the distant voice of departures echoing across the dome. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, one hand gripping the key to locker 19 in my pocket, the other clutching my bag where the cassette rested, sealed inside a cloth pouch. I had not slept in 30 hours. Coffee and fear were the only things keeping me upright. Every face around me felt like it was watching too long. Every footstep behind me felt timed to mine. The world had turned into a stage, and I was both the actor and the hunted. Locker 19 was tucked in the east corridor near an out-of-service newsstand. The rows of gray metal doors looked harmless, almost ordinary. I knelt, slid the key into the lock, and turned. It opened with a click that sounded louder than it should have. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was a thick envelope and an old flip phone with no battery cover. Nothing else. I carried the items to a corner bench and unfolded the paper. Inside were printed documents, maps, and an identification badge marked Department of Defense Research Division Northwind Protocol. My father's name was on the roster, but so was another one, Richard Hayes, civilian liaison. My breath caught. Even in death, his shadow lingered in every page. The documents outlined a timeline, the development of neurochemical agents designed to enhance obedience, memory, suppression, and emotional conditioning. The program's final phase, civilian application. My stomach tightened. They hadn't just tested soldiers, they'd planned to bring it home. The attached photo showed rows of medical beds lined in a warehouse, each tagged, subject pending. I turned to the flip phone. Inside the battery compartment was a small memory card. When I inserted it into my laptop, a series of encrypted files appeared. One folder was labeled Kandahar Brief, Final Transmission. I clicked it. The video opened to a dimly lit tent. My father sat in front of the camera, dirt on his face, his uniform torn. He looked exhausted but calm. If this reaches you, he said, it means I couldn't stop them. They'll bury this, call it an accident, maybe even make me the villain. But Northwind can't disappear again. Not after what it's done. Find the ones who know. Ellis, Lark, Hayes, they were all part of it. Some stayed to protect it, some to destroy it. You'll have to decide which I was. He paused, his expression softening. Whatever happens, know that I never stopped loving you, kiddo. Real love never dies. The video ended. My chest ached. It wasn't just a message, it was a confession. My father had left a map of truth that stretched beyond war, beyond death. I realized the cassette Lark gave me was likely the audio of this same recording, the original, unedited version. I copied everything to the cloud drive again, encrypting it under a new alias. Then I sealed the documents back in the envelope. My next step was clear. Deliver it to the press before it vanished again. But when I stood up, I noticed a man leaning against the far column gray suit, black earpiece, unreadable expression. The same kind I had seen in Ravenfield. His gaze met mine for only a second, but that was enough. I turned and walked toward the west exit, forcing myself not to run. Outside, the city roared with late morning traffic. I blended into the crowd, crossing street after street until the station disappeared behind me. My mind raced. I needed a contact, a journalist who could handle this without getting silenced. I thought of someone my father once mentioned in a letter, Claire Monroe, an investigative reporter who covered military accountability hearings a decade ago. I searched her name on my phone. The first result: Claire Monroe, independent correspondent, Washington, D.C. I booked a one-way train ticket. As the city blurred past the window, I felt the weight of everything pressing down: my father's death, Richard's betrayal, Ellis's warning, Lark's sacrifice. All of them threads leading to this final point. I knew the closer I got to the truth, the closer danger would follow. Halfway through the journey, the train slowed suddenly. The conductor's voice crackled through the speakers. "We're making an unscheduled stop. Please remain seated." The car fell silent. Through the window, I saw a line of black vehicles waiting near the tracks. My pulse spiked. 2 men boarded the car from the rear, scanning rows of passengers. One of them held a photo. I ducked low, slipping my bag under the seat. The woman beside me gave me a puzzled look, but I whispered, "Please, don't say anything." She nodded faintly. When the men reached our row, one of them paused. "Miss," he said, "may I see your identification?" I handed him my ticket with shaking hands. He studied it, then looked at me for a long moment. I held my breath. Finally, he nodded. "Thank you." Then they moved on. The moment they stepped into the next car, I grabbed my bag and walked toward the restroom. From there, I climbed through the maintenance hatch onto the narrow connector between cars. The wind tore at my hair as I crouched against the rail. When the train began moving again, I jumped. The impact slammed through my body, but the mud softened the fall. I rolled, gasping, clutching my bag to my chest. The train roared away into the distance. I lay in the field for a long time, staring up at the gray sky, letting the rain sting my face. Somewhere above the noise, I thought I could still hear my father's voice. "Walk proud. Love deep. Never forget." I stood, wiped the dirt from my hands, and started walking toward the nearest road. The world could call me a fugitive, a liar, a daughter chasing ghosts. I didn't care. Truth was worth running for. By nightfall, I reached a small bus depot near the border of Maryland. The attendant asked where I was headed. "D.C.," I said. "Just D.C." He printed my ticket and handed it over with a faint smile. "You're catching the late one. Not many people travel that line anymore." "Good," I said quietly. "Then maybe they won't find me." As the bus pulled into the darkness, headlights carving a path through the rain, I felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there, but beneath it was something stronger resolve. My father's voice had carried across years, war, and silence to reach me here. Now it was my turn to speak for him, and somewhere deep inside, I knew the moment I released his truth, the world would never be the same again. The bus rolled into Washington, D.C. just before dawn. The city was still half asleep, its monuments bathed in pale light, its streets slick from overnight rain. I stepped off at the terminal, carrying nothing but a backpack and the envelope of evidence pressed against my chest. The world around me felt deceptively calm. But calm was a lie. It always was before the storm. I found a small diner near Union Market, ordered black coffee, and sat by the window to gather myself. My reflection looked like someone else, eyes hollow, hair tangled, a woman who'd aged years in a few weeks. When the waitress refilled my cup, I asked, "Do you know where I can find Claire Monroe, the journalist?" She raised an eyebrow. "You mean the one that got blacklisted after the Pentagon leak?" My heart sank. "She's still in town?" The waitress shrugged. "She lives out by Meridian Hill. Folks say she doesn't do interviews anymore." By noon, I was at her address, a narrow brownstone with ivy creeping up the side and a metal gate that squealed when I pushed it open. I knocked. No answer. I was about to leave when a voice behind the door said, "If you're selling redemption, I'm not buying." I froze. Claire Monroe? Silence. Then the door cracked open just enough for one sharp gray eye to study me. "Who sent you?" she asked. "My father," I said quietly. "His name was Captain Daniel Ward." That changed everything. The chain slid back. She opened the door wider. "Come in." The house smelled like paper and old coffee. Stacks of files and printed articles filled the living room. "I knew your father," she said. "He was one of the few who talked before the hearings were shut down." She studied me, then asked, "Why now?" I placed the cassette and envelope on the table, because they killed everyone who tried to tell the truth, and I think I'm next. She leaned forward, opening the envelope carefully. Her eyes scanned the documents, then stopped. "Northwind," she murmured. "I thought that died with the last war." "It didn't," I said. "They just changed the name." I played the video from the flash drive. My father's face flickered across the screen, his voice calm, resolute, haunting. When it ended, Claire sat motionless. "You realize what this means?" she said softly. "If this is real, it's the biggest military crime since the Geneva trials." It's real," I said. "I have the location, the logs, the experiments, everything. I just need someone brave enough to publish it before they find me." Claire looked at me for a long time. "You think the truth will set you free," she said. "But it doesn't. It just makes you a target." I met her gaze, then let them aim. She exhaled, then stood. "All right. We do this my way. No digital trails. No phones. We go to the source." She pulled an old recorder from her drawer. "I'll document everything in analog. That's the only thing they can't erase remotely." We spent hours cross-referencing dates, scanning photos, recording testimony. I told her everything: Richard, Ellis, Lark, Fort Reagan, every name, every death, every whisper of guilt that still echoed in my head. When I finished, she sat back and rubbed her temples. "They'll come before this sees print," she said. "They always do." The knock came at dusk. 3 sharp raps against the front door. Claire and I froze. "Don't answer," I whispered. The knocking came again, louder. Then a voice. "Federal marshals, open up." Claire's expression darkened. "They don't knock twice. Go out the back." She handed me a small cassette copy she had just finished recording. "Take this. It's the duplicate. If I stall them, you run." I hesitated. "I can't leave you." She smiled faintly. "Kid, I've been running from them longer than you've been alive. Now go." I slipped through the kitchen, down the back stairs, and into the alley. Rain was falling again, washing the city in reflections of streetlights. I was halfway across the block when I heard shouting, then glass breaking. A gunshot echoed through the street. My chest clenched, but I kept running. I ducked into the subway, heart hammering, gripping the cassette so tight it left marks on my palm. On the wall above the platform, a flickering monitor played the news. My blood ran cold as I saw the headline. "Investigative journalist found dead in home fire." I couldn't breathe. The footage showed flames pouring from Claire's brownstone. The anchor's voice said the cause was accidental electrical malfunction. Lies again, so polished they sounded almost merciful. I sat on the bench, shaking. The city's roar muffled behind the rush of blood in my ears. Claire had risked everything for a story the world might never see. When the train arrived, I boarded, without knowing where it was going. I just needed to move. To stay alive. I pressed my forehead against the window as tunnels flashed by. In the reflection, I barely recognized the woman staring back. But behind the exhaustion and fear, there was something new defiance. I thought about my father's last words, the ones he said before the explosion. Real love never dies. I understood now what he meant. It wasn't about sentiment, it was about truth. About refusing to let it be buried by power or comfort. Love was the act of remembering when the world demanded silence. As the train rattled into the dark, I pulled the cassette from my coat pocket and whispered, "You didn't die for nothing." But when I looked up, I noticed a man at the far end of the car watching me. No phone, no bag, just stillness. His eyes didn't blink. When the train stopped at the next station, he stood. So did I. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the next chapter of my father's war had just found me. The man followed me off the train. He didn't rush, he didn't hide. He simply walked 5 paces behind, matching my every turn through the underground corridors of the station. His calmness terrified me more than a gun ever could. I clutched the cassette inside my jacket, its edges digging into my ribs like a warning. When I reached the escalator, I pretended to fumble for change, slipped past a crowd of commuters, and darted through an emergency exit. The alarm wailed, but I didn't care. I ran up into the blinding daylight of the city. My shoes slapped against the wet pavement, breath ragged, the morning air thick with diesel and drizzle. I turned twice, he was still there. I ducked into a bookstore cafe and pressed myself between 2 aisles of travel guides. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. Through the reflection in the glass door, I saw him pause outside, scanning the street. He lifted a hand to his ear, an earpiece. Then, after a moment, he walked away. I waited another full minute before moving. When I finally stepped out, the world felt too loud. Horns blaring, footsteps rushing, voices blending into static. I headed toward the National Mall, blending into the flow of tourists. Somewhere between the Capitol and the monument, I stopped and looked up at the sky. It was gray again. Always gray. I whispered, "Dad, I'm so tired." But exhaustion couldn't erase purpose. I needed to release the truth. Not to the government, not to a paper that could be silenced, to the people themselves. The cassette was analog. It could be copied, digitized, spread faster than they could contain it. I walked until I found a small tech shop near DuPont Circle. Inside, a young clerk looked up from his counter. "Need help?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Yeah. I need to convert some old audio. Private archive." He nodded and led me to a workstation in the back. I handed him the cassette. He inserted it carefully, and the tape began to play. My father's voice filled the tiny room. Steady, raw, unfiltered. The confession, the same one from the video, echoed again, but this time with something new. At the end of the tape, he said, "If this reaches the light, then justice has a chance. If it doesn't, remember this. Truth is like water, it always finds a way out." The clerk looked confused. "That's powerful stuff. Family recording?" "Something like that," I said softly. "Can you make a digital copy?" "Sure thing." He turned to the computer. "Should take about 15 minutes. While he worked, I sat in the corner, scanning the street through the window. 2 black SUVs parked at the curb. My pulse quickened. "Is there a back door here?" I asked quietly. The clerk pointed. "Storage, exit, down that hall." I stood. "When the copy's done, save it to that flash drive. If anyone asks, you've never seen me." He stared at me, confused but too polite to argue. "Got it." I slipped through the back exit and stepped into an alleyway heavy with rain. My father's words echoed in my head. Truth is like water. I ran through the alley, heart pounding, until I reached the opposite street. The SUVs were still out front. 2 men got out, scanning the storefront. I watched from the corner as they entered the shop. A few seconds later, I saw the clerk shake his head and shrug. They left empty-handed. He had done as I asked. I exhaled, shaking. I bought a burner laptop from a pawn shop nearby, loaded the copied file, and uploaded it to every major file-sharing network I could find. It took less than 3 minutes. The confession went live, titled simply, "The North Wind Truth." Then I closed the laptop, dropped it into a trash bin, and walked away. An hour later, I sat on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, watching strangers scroll through their phones. Somewhere, on millions of screens, my father's voice was speaking again. For the first time since his death, he was being heard. The world would decide what to believe, but silence no longer belonged to them. That night, the news exploded. Every network, every channel, every feed playing fragments of the confession, government spokespeople denied everything. Fabrication, they called it. AI manipulation, they claimed, but deep down people already knew. You can't fake the tremor in a dying man's voice. I checked into a motel under another name and watched the coverage alone. My hands shook as I listened to anchors argue over truth like it was a product to be packaged. My father's face filled the screen, frozen mid-sentence. Below it, the caption read, "Leaked tapes expose secret military experiment. Investigation underway." For a long time I just stared. Then I cried. Not out of sadness, but out of release. Everything he fought for, everything he died for, was finally alive again. In the middle of the night, a knock came at my door. Soft. 3 times. I froze. Then, a voice familiar, trembling, spoke. "It's me." I opened the door. My mother stood there, drenched from the rain, her eyes red. "I saw the video," she said. "They said it's fake, but I know it's not." She stepped forward, hugged me tight. "He'd be proud of you." We sat together until dawn, watching the city wake. She told me she'd left everything behind the house. The memories, the ghosts. "I just want peace now," she whispered. "For both of us." I nodded. "Maybe we'll finally have it." As the first light of morning spread across the skyline, the weight of years lifted slightly. My father's truth was no longer buried. His love, his courage, his voice, they'd all become part of something larger than any of us. But peace, I realized, was never permanent. My phone buzzed a new email from an encrypted source. The subject line read, "They're looking for you." The sender's name, unknown. I looked out the window at the sunrise, my mother asleep beside me, and whispered, "Then let them look." Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't running from the truth. I was walking with it. Morning broke softly over Washington, but it didn't feel like peace. The city was too quiet, like it was holding its breath. The news anchors spoke in circles, denials, debates, demands for accountability, but beneath the noise, something irreversible had already happened. The world had heard my father's voice. And once truth touches light, it never fully goes back to the dark. By noon, the media had turned him into a headline. The soldier who spoke from the grave. Some called him a hero, others called him a traitor. Commentators filled airwaves with their versions of his story, while people who'd never known his name before that day lit candles outside memorial walls and whispered, "Thank you." I watched from the motel window as the country argued over his memory. I didn't need them to agree. I only needed them to listen. My mother and I left the city before sunset. She was quiet most of the drive, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the horizon. When we passed the Virginia border, she finally spoke. "He would have hated the attention," she said softly. I smiled. "Yeah." He'd say, "Let the work speak, not the man." We both laughed through tears. The road stretched ahead like a promise empty, uncertain, but open. We stopped at a small coastal town 2 states south, the kind of place where the air smells like salt and pine, where no one asks questions. We rented a cottage near the dunes, small but warm. At night, the sea's rhythm filled the silence, steady as breath. My mother planted my father's old jacket by the porch railing, let the wind carry the scent of cedar and oil into the air. "He's home now," she said. Weeks passed, investigations began, former officials were subpoenaed. Words like accountability, cover-up, and war crimes returned to headlines for the first time in years. I stayed hidden, waiting for the chaos to settle, refusing interviews. I wasn't chasing justice anymore. I had already delivered it. Justice now belonged to whoever dared to keep listening. One morning, I went down to the shore alone. The tide was low, the sky wide and pale. I carried my father's journal, weathered and worn, and read his final entry again. "If truth costs me my life, then let my life be the receipt. For her, for all of them, may love outlast fear." I closed the book and let the waves take it, watching the water swallow each page until it disappeared. Behind me, footsteps crunched in the sand. My mother approached slowly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She sat beside me, her expression soft. "What now?" she asked. I looked at the horizon. "Now we live. For him." She nodded. The gulls screamed above us, wild and free. That night, I logged into the cloud drive one last time. Tens of millions of views. My father's recording had spread across continents. Translated, remixed, archived by strangers who refused to let it vanish. The comments below were filled with messages, soldiers, families, children, all saying the same thing in different words. "Thank you for telling the truth." I closed the laptop and walked outside. The stars were bright enough to see the Milky Way stretched across the sky. The ocean whispered, the same rhythm it had the night of my wedding, the night everything changed. I realized then that grief never truly leaves. It just changes shape. Sometimes it becomes silence. Sometimes it becomes truth. I thought about the empty chair at my wedding, the one draped with his jacket. I thought about how love, when honest, refuses to die quietly. Maybe that was what my father had been trying to teach me all along, not that heroes live forever, but that their truth does, if someone is brave enough to carry it forward. I whispered into the wind. "I carried it, Dad. It's safe now." The sea answered with a soft hiss across the sand, like a voice fading into peace. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. As dawn rose, I walked back toward the cottage. My mother was standing by the porch, smiling through tears. "You look like him when you smile," she said. I laughed. "Then maybe he's still here." She nodded. "Always." Inside, the radio played softly an old love song my parents used to dance to. I poured coffee, sat at the table, and let the warmth fill the space between silence and memory. Sometimes I still dream of that day, his voice on the screen, the way the crowd went silent, the way truth finally spoke louder than fear. But I don't wake up crying anymore. I wake up grateful. Because real love, the kind born of courage and loss, doesn't fade. It becomes light. And if anyone ever asks what this story was about, I'll tell them this. It wasn't about war, or secrets, or vengeance. It was about a father who loved his daughter enough to leave her the truth, and a daughter who loved him enough to set it free.